Hey everybody, it's Dan, and welcome to Drinking a Movie. As you know, on this channel, we pair cocktails and spirits to some of the greatest movies ever made. And again tonight, we've got an excellent pairing. But before we get into it, if you're new to the channel, or if you're returning and haven't done so, please click subscribe, please click like, and please click that notification bell, which will let you know when new videos are posted. It goes a long way to helping me out, and I really, really appreciate it. Okay, so tonight, as my sweatshirt might suggest, we're going to look at Ireland, and in honor of St. Patrick's Day, we're going to do a whiskey tasting with a nice Irish whiskey. I'll show you the ropes about tasting whiskeys and some of the things to look for. And then we'll also look at a 1952 film. It's an American film, the big American star, and a legendary American director, but it takes place in Ireland. It was shot in Ireland, and it's very, very Irish. So, without further ado, Aaron go bragh. Alright, so first on the menu is an Irish whiskey called Greenspot. Have it on the shelf here. Now, Greenspot is a 10-year-old Irish whiskey. We'll get into a little bit about aging. We'll get a little bit more about how to taste it. But this is excellent stuff. And then next we'll look at the 1952 film, The Quiet Man. Now this was made by legendary American director John Ford, starred legendary Hollywood actor John Wayne, and has an almost entirely Irish cast who are absolutely magnificent in this movie. Love the film. Can't wait to talk about that. But before we do, let's taste some whiskey. Okay, so we have our Irish whiskey. So this is Greenspot. As I mentioned, it's a 10-year-old whiskey, which means it was aged in ex-bourbon casks for 10 years before they pulled it out, cut it with water, and bottled it up for us. We'll get into the Greenspot story a little bit, but let's pour this whiskey so it opens up a little bit before we taste. It's got a nice color. Now Greenspot, what's interesting about this one is it is what they call single pot still. Now that refers not only to the fact that it's made in a pot still, but also it combines both malted and unmalted barley. So it's very unique, very distinctly Irish. Why they went that route is because the British, back in the day, again that strained relationship with Ireland, they taxed malted barley very, very heavily, and that was a way for the distillers to get around that heavy price, was to start incorporating unmalted barley into it, and the result is really, really uniquely Irish, very tasty. You get a lot of grassy green notes, and we'll get into a little bit more. This is opening up nice. Oh yeah. But so when you talk about single pot still whiskey, again, it's not just about the still, it's also about the use of malted and unmalted barley. So excellent stuff. Again, Greenspot. Now Greenspot was what was called a bonded whiskey, and what that means is, if you see here on the label, Mitchell's and Sons. Now Mitchell and Sons were a winery and spirit shop in Dublin, and what they would do is they bought new make whiskey from Middleton, or Jameson's at the time as well, and they would barrel it, age it themselves, actually under the streets of Dublin, in warehouse underneath the ground, and just beautiful stuff. They have a series of spotted colors. There's Yellow Spot, which is a 15-year-old named Red Spot, and they just recently re-released a 7-year cask strength Irish whiskey, Blue Spot. Good stuff. Alright, so let's do some tasting. So, first thing you want to do when you nose a whiskey is you don't want to shove your nose right into the glass. It's alcohol. It's going to burn your senses. And you want to breathe in through your mouth and your nose at the same time. So you come in. Yeah, that's nice. So I'm getting, and I tend to get this with a lot of Irish, those green notes, orchard fruits, apple, pear, a little bit of caramel, slight maple, but way more subtle. Very, very pleasant nose. Very nice. Now, A lot of people will do this and say, oh, I smell whiskey. Well, of course you do, but if you do this more and more, you'll find the little notes, and it's really great if you bounce off 2 different whiskeys. You can really begin to get the senses of the other, the aromas that you get from a whiskey. Oh yeah, top of the line nose for sure here. Again, orchard fruits, maple, caramel, getting a little bit of meringue, kind of that sweet, desserty smell, almost pastry-like. That's very, very nice. So next, let's do some tasting. So obviously you don't want to, these aren't shots. We're not going to down this stuff. We're going to take a nice small sip, let it sit in our tongue. Okay, yeah. The taste of this really complements the nose. Again, you're getting that the green notes, the kind of the apple, not a tart apple, but a kind of a really ripe apple that's juicy, not overly sweet, but you just get that real apple sense, and again that pear shows up in the taste. The caramel is kind of weighed off the nose, and in the taste it's really more just that meringue paste to me, that really kind of creamy, sweet flavor. Yeah, this is absolutely delicious. Reminded of why it's one of my favorite Irish whiskeys, one of my favorite whiskeys, period. I really recommend, if you want to get into learning about whiskeys, trying whiskeys, I really recommend Irish. It's a great entry point. Scotch has a little bit more bold flavor to it, maybe a little bit more challenging for the beginner. Love Scotch, don't get me wrong. You get into bourbons. Bourbons can be very hot, very sweet and nice, but pretty strong and intense up front in terms of their punch. But the Irish kind of has that nice mellow entry point, and it does have its character. Now, Irish whiskeys almost exclusively, there are exceptions, but almost exclusively are triple distilled. So when they run through the distillation process, it's a little bit smoother and a little bit more refined. Scotch tends to only be distilled twice. And you look at things like vodka, and you look at some of the premium vodkas that are distilled 7 times, 8 times. Well, it makes sense for vodka because you want vodka to be flavorless and odorless as much as possible. So the more you distill, the more pure it becomes, and some of those characteristics that would adjust the flavor disappear. But of course, the fact that this is aged in ex-bourbon casks, and I believe it's also aged in some sherry casks to finish it off, it really is a nice, beautiful flavor. Again, can't recommend Irish whiskey enough. So, delicious. Now, let's go see that movie. All right, welcome to the movie chair. Let's talk about The Quiet Man. Now, this film, as mentioned, came out in 1952, and it was a romantic comedy, which was a bit of a departure for John Wayne and John Ford. Usually the films they worked on together were westerns, but they pulled it off here really well. Now, the film won 2 Oscars. It won for Best Director and for Best Cinematography, and we'll get into a little bit of those aspects for sure. But I gotta tell you, from a personal standpoint, this film reminds me of St. Patrick's Day. My dad loved this film. We'd watch it around that time. It was always on TV. And subsequently, I've fallen in love with the film. And it really is a great picture, like a time capsule of this Irish village. And of course, we'll get into that as well. So before we get going too deep into it, let me give you my 3 keys. First, key number 1, John Ford, the director, a giant in the industry. And we'll get into his technique, his story, the way he really brought this film together. Beautiful job for sure. Second is the cast. You got John Wayne fronting the cast. You've got Maureen O'Hara as the lead actress. she does a fantastic job. And then the entire cast of what I call John Ford's repertoire. He dealt with a lot of Irish actors. They're all from the Abbey Theatre, which is a famous theatre in Dublin, and he made several Irish-related films and used a lot of these actors in them. And then the third thing was just Ireland itself. So this picture is really an homage to Ireland. It's really John Ford at his most sentimental, and the imagery is amazing, the music's beautiful, the characters and the personalities are fantastic as well. Okay, so let's talk about those three keys, starting with number one, John Ford. Now, John Ford is an absolute legend in directing. He started off in the silent era, worked all the way through the 1960s. Along the way, he won 4 Oscars, made some of the most memorable and classic films of all time, and really left an indelible impression on the directors that followed after him. In fact, I would say the list of directors who were not influenced by Ford is a lot shorter than the list that was. So that's really a testament to the quality that Ford brought. Okay, so let's talk about Ford's style. Now, the best way to sum up his style is measured simplicity. And what I mean by this is he would use really a slower pace. His shots were simple and unpretentious. And in fact, The Quiet Man is really the essence of simplicity. I mean, he used eye-level cameras. He didn't use bird's eye. He didn't use experimental angles. He never used a dolly. So he really just framed his characters to a point which he called an invisible technique. And what he means by invisible technique is he wanted the audience to forget that they were watching a movie. Now, don't confuse simplicity with ease or lack of creativity, because that is certainly not the case. In fact, director John Milius described Ford's style in terms of the Japanese idea of conservation of line. He said that Ford could do with a couple of brush strokes what it takes others 6 or 8 to do. So that gives you an indication of just how revered he was. Okay, so let's talk about the cast. Now, such an integral part of the story in bringing this town to life, but obviously the cast is led by John Wayne, and he plays a character named Sean Thornton, who left this village as a child and returns as an adult. He was an ex-boxer who we find out retired from boxing after killing a man in the ring, and kind of wanted to get away from that environment, get away from the U.S. and start over again back in his native Ireland. So he returns to town, and there he meets and falls in love with Mary Kate Danaher, and she's played by Maureen O'Hara, and she's feisty, strong-willed, and as villager Michaeline Flynn, played by Barry Fitzgerald, says, "Her red head is no lie," which is a really great line and sums up her kind of fiery personality. But they meet and they fall in love, and you get this kind of Irish dynamic with her brother, who's a bully, who basically owns her property, and his name is Will Danaher, Squire Red Danaher, and he's played by Victor McLaughlin, and he is an actor who actually seems to tower over John Wayne. He's that big of a man, but he was in several different John Ford films, and it's just a fantastic actor in his own right. But anyway, so he has her possessions, and John Wayne doesn't care about the possessions. However, she does, and it becomes this big battle. And because John Wayne had killed a man in the boxing ring, and so no one really knows about Sean Thornton's story other than a reverend in town who's a boxing fan. So the fact that he won't, and he has several opportunities to stand up to Will Danaher, but he won't. He's kind of becoming dubbed somewhat cowardice, but he refuses to fight because he'd killed a man the last time he fought, and it's something that, obviously has haunted him, and he does not want to fight. But at the end of the film is probably the largest, longest, most comedic fist fight in cinema history between John Wayne and Victor McLaughlin, and their characters going at it, and it's really, really worth the price of admission on the film alone. Okay, so the rest of the cast of characters really, really fall into that Irish stereotypical sentiment, but it works here, and you can kind of get over that kind of typical storyline Irish personalities because they're still so charming, and it's such a fun place. In fact, that fight, it's hilarious because the town has been waiting for this fight, and now it's become the biggest event in years there, and people from other towns are trying to rush in to come see this fight. You know, you've got people taking bets, you've got the priest and the reverend and everyone kind of involved in this whole fight, and it's really comical, funny, and believe it or not, it brings them together. Okay, so the third key is Ireland itself, and it really comes to life through the vision and photography of the cinematographer Winston C. Hoke. And again, he won an Oscar for his work, and it well deserved. Ireland really comes alive here. The magical landscape, the beautiful cottage, the running brooks, the village, and even the people really come to life almost like paintings. And just a remarkable job here. And it's one of those movies where the location becomes a character, and not only do we get that from what Hoke did and Ford's input, but from the townspeople, the culture, and the customs. It really adds the flavor of Ireland and contributes so much to the story. Okay, so in conclusion, I could have probably spent an hour talking about this film, but I'm not going to do that to you. It's just a great film, just a classic. Get away for a couple hours, forget about life for a couple hours, enjoy St. Patrick's Day. You get the Irish flavor, the music is wonderful, the acting is top-notch. John Ford, of course, is a master and really delivers the story beautifully. And I tell you what, when you have an Irish whiskey as good as Greenspot, you can't go wrong. I mean, the two together, match made in heaven. So here's to my dad who turned me on to this movie, and here's to you. Stay healthy, stay happy, and until we see each other again, cheers. Or I should say, slanja.